Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the Binge Factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Binge Factor. I'm Tracy Hazard, and I have the host of CMO Stories. That's Chief Marketing Officer, in case you didn't know, but I'm sure you do. CMO Stories, Joeri Billast. And I am so excited that I got to have such a wonderful international interview for a change. Joeri is from Belgium, and we just had such fun talking about my trip to Belgium that I took at one point. But I have really, really enjoyed meeting so many new people, and Joeri is one of them. And we had fun. I was already on his podcast, and he has now come on ours. And it's just been so much fun to talk to people like Joeri and really learn why they start their show, what they're doing, how they feel about it. And there's a lot of European excitement going on here. And he's finding real great success in his show that I can't wait to share with you. So we're going to get to the interview in just a minute, but I want to tell you a little bit about more about him. So he is a fractional CMO and social media strategist for tech scale-ups and solopreneurs. He's the author of the 5K Challenge for solopreneurs, and he sold seven-figure businesses in business analytics in 2013. So he has quite the experience. You also want to check out and see what he's doing on social media and other places, because remember, Chief Marketing Officer, fractional, he's got some things going on with how he does things. So definitely check out his website, check out his podcast, check out his social channels. And don't forget that you can always do that at thebingefactor.com, the blog post for the episode. Let's hear straight from Belgium, Joeri Billast. Well, it's nice to flip the mic on you today, Joeri. I love that we're getting to do this in reverse now.
Yeah, Tracy. Hello again.
Hello again. Yeah. So, CMO Stories, I really like the focus of it. I like that it's so focused on that level of listener, that level of guest as well. Mm-hmm. What made you decide to focus your show there?
Yeah, no, in everything that you are doing, if you have a business or you do marketing, you want to have your audience in mind, of course. And for me, I was just looking at who is really my audience, who is resonating with me, who gives me the feedback that I'm inspiring those people. And I have like two audiences, and one audience is the solopreneurs, which actually I've written this book for. And the second audience, I realized I don't really have something for tech scale-up, tech entrepreneurs or marketers, and I'm really resonating with those people. So how it came up, this idea, I was at a web summit 1 year ago. And then I had the opportunity to book the podcast booth. And I said, okay, let's do this because there is not so many people that can book it. So I just booked it without having a title for my podcast and without having a guest. So I said, okay, let's think about the title. I made a walk and came up with CMO Stories. That feels good. That is it. And then I just asked people, CMOs at that moment. And like that, it started, and it really felt good from the first episode. So
you knew you hit on it.
Yeah, right. And also the fact when I asked people to come on the podcast, they said yes directly. So a lot of people said yes. I was not expecting that, Well,
I think that's a really good lesson, that when you get your title right, it means that it is attractive to the guests. Like they're like, especially with a new show, you don't have traction yet. So they don't know how good your show is. But if they want to be associated with that name, that makes it easier to get started.
Exactly. Because, in the beginning, I was really looking more narrow. I will invite CMOs, marketing directors, on my podcast. So I only contacted those people and I said, it's for you. And of course, then I had directly 7-8 people that said yes, that were not even, that said that they were open to podcasting just because they were CMOs. I asked them.
Wonderful. Well, what made you think podcasting was going to be a good thing?
Well, I already heard about this. So already I'm in Belgium and I see trends happening in the US and everywhere. And I always saw that podcasting, okay, people are doing it, but it's not really a thing, yet. And then I was looking at where should I go? What should I do with my business that I'm not yet doing? And I was thinking about, okay, I need first to finish my book, was my first thing. And then I said, okay, what do we need to do? YouTube or podcasting? And I said, let's do YouTube. But then, it felt like podcasting is really, I need to give it a shot. I need to give it a try. But sometimes, in life, you get busy and you don't do it because there is no trigger. But suddenly there was a trigger with Web Summit and I said, let's go for it. And now, Tracy, I must say that podcasting is a thing that really, I really make progress. I would say, almost say at light speed comparing to the other things that I've started. It really is flowing for me. So it feels that the energy is right.
Well, that's good. I'm so glad you said that because I think that that's kind of the underestimated value of a podcast that people don't really realize is that how much acceleration can really happen when you hit that balance between the right listeners, the right guests, and what you're doing in your business. You get that right. And that just accelerates things in terms of your marketing overall.
Right. And also something I will say is that because of the podcast, I get people on my show. I get to talk to people that otherwise I would never have talked to, It shortens, I would say, the path to reach someone. And that if you ask people, do you want to come on my podcast? So I invite you to the podcast. That's like, oh, what is it about? And they like it. It's not like, he's going to sell me something. So it's a whole different, I would say, feeling, energy.
I love that. So what's the biggest challenge for you with the podcast? What was challenging in setting it up and what's still challenging for you today?
Well, I was starting, I had okay, I need to be consistent. I need to release one podcast every week on Wednesday. And in the beginning, it was okay, I need guests, but where are they coming from? I just started. And then at certain moments, I realized I don't have a podcast episode yet for next Wednesday. And I did.
We've all been there.
And then I made solo podcasts. And sometimes I didn't have so much time. I just took some time in the weekend, took my iPhone, and just, for instance, talked about my book or talked about a conference where I was and my lessons learned or something like that. And that was the challenge at that moment. And then continuing, then I was seeing how can I grow my podcast was then the second thought. And now I see that just by being consistent, by having people that come on your podcast, sharing the podcast, it's growing and it's growing. And then the next steps would be that the podcast at the moment is only on audio apps, but later on it will also be on YouTube. But then again, everything comes together because I like to be on cam, so YouTube comes. And then the next step, Tracy, and I know that's also what your business is about monetizing the podcast. Because of course I spend time in it, and somewhere you want to get results out of that. And for me at this moment, it's most, I would say, networking, being in touch with people, being in contact, but also I feel that I'm building my authority outside of Belgium. Yeah, that works. People now reach out to me to be on my podcast, and because they listen to other episodes. And but what also is, but I was struggling with in the beginning. So English is not my native language. It's Dutch, and then my second language is French in Belgium. I was thinking, should I, be doing this? Is it good enough? And then you have people from the US, from the UK, saying, "Oh no, it's really good. I like it. I like
it is good." So yeah, you should be proud of it. So I'm gonna inject my binge factor here because I think this is the perfect timing for it. One of the things that I really am fascinated about CMO stories and about the way that you approach it is that it has the international flair, that you're using it to your advantage. And so from a guesting perspective, I want to be associated with your show because it's going to put me in this international community that I don't normally get to. So it's extremely attractive for people in any country to want to be associated in that global community. So you've created that ability to do that. And then second, the other side of it is that from a listener's perspective, I'm getting a broader view of the world, which I need to run my business. I need to understand how marketing's happening around the world and who's doing successful things at other places, because we get very isolated in what we do. So you've given us a broader perspective for both the guest to get that as well as the listener. That's an amazing feat in one show.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, that's also the feeling that I have. I use the fact that I'm in Europe. I have these different languages. I can connect with people around in other countries. I use it, to my benefit. I really like it also, to get to know people from around the world. And I also tell it to people. It's with people from everywhere. And so, sometimes the struggle is with the time zones because
I know it is a struggle, right? It is a struggle to deal with, like, when am I going to record? It's your evening, it's my morning. Like, that is a struggle. But when you make it work, what you're creating is an amazing collection of people that are sharing their stories and tasks, ideas, concepts of things that I can apply that I may not hear anywhere else. It's why I'm going to choose your show over another show. And that's where that binge factor comes in. And so, yeah, you should be very proud of what you built and keep that going, because I think that's the beautiful part of what is really making your show binge worthy.
Right. Because you say that, I realize I should more emphasize this, that it's, with people from around the world, and it's, with you hear different stories and you get to...
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that it's really, like, I get this question all the time from people who want to break into the US market or want to do something in the US market. And they'll ask us, well, like, what do you think about marketing in this way? So really asking those questions, I think deep diving into that and keeping that unique for you could also be a great social media attractor, so that it's really showing that international flair is going to continue through the show, and it's going to make them want to click through and then subscribe. So definitely use that more to your advantage. You've got that, so do it. You're in a unique place to do it that nobody else can, right? Yeah. I don't have a network in Belgium. I wish I did.
And that's a good feeling to have. And like I said, with this podcast, I'm experiencing things that I was not even thinking that it was possible. Like 2 days ago, I got 2 people that wanted to pay to be on the podcast, to be sooner, to cut the waiting line. And I said, is this really possible that it is happening? So
it is happening to you. Well, let's talk about those 3 things, because you were talking about, kind of, you were able to get a bunch of guests in the beginning because you had that sort of situation where they were all there and you could ask them and they showed up. So that was easy. Then you were struggling a little bit with the calendaring and trying to get the time zones right. And, now are you being more selective about the guests? Do you have sort of a guest vetting process? What is sort of your viewpoint on that guest attractor and that guest vetting process?
At the moment, to be honest, at first when this started to go well, that like so many people that wanted to come on the podcast, of course, I did a selection. It was like, okay, it's not only CMOs, but it's broader. But it's not my goal to have like every agency coming on my podcast to sell their services. I didn't want that. I want, people with a story, with something that people can really learn about. It just happened like that suddenly I came back from holiday and I came back and I had my calendar open. I have like this calendar. It's not a calendar, it's a Acuity link, and people could book into the podcast. And I thought on this website, Podmatch, where we can,
that's where we met.
Yeah, I just sent a few messages to people, if you would like, you can come on the podcast. But Tracy, I came back and I had like in one day, 4 people had booked one time slot after the other in my calendar, and even was restricted.
So now you need a more restrictive calendar so you space yourself out better, right?
I was thinking, if people come from the US, they will, book in my evening, and it will only be 1 slot or 2 slots. But also someone booked from Gibraltar, someone, from...
You didn't think about it being all over the world. I love it.
And then what I said was, okay, now I need to be more careful. I have now this, I would say, waiting list. I have like lots of episodes now. I recorded again an episode today, so it will be at the end of September, begin October already, that I'm with my new guests. So I will
So that's a challenge in and of itself, because if you get too far ahead, then they lose the excitement of being on your show in the promotion process, right? And so, so you kind of do have to balance that.
I know that's where I'm at the moment. So I said, okay, it's good that people want to be on my podcast. Will it continue, or is it just a phase for one or another reason that they find my podcast? So I wanted to give myself some, breath, I would say, at time. Okay, if those podcasts are filled in, I actually can do some more work too, because That's also important. But yeah, you are right. That's something I'm struggling now with. Should I change the frequency at a certain moment, or I'm thinking about, but then I need to keep up with the frequency? Or should I, like, what I will do with those guests that pay at bonus episodes? So that's a question mark for me.
Good problems to have, right? So I love that. Well, listener growth is the biggest thing that most everybody is looking for. How are you really going out there and making sure you're publicizing your show and trying to get more listeners for your show? How do you go about doing that?
Well, in the beginning, I was like a bit careful because I was not, it's the imposter syndrome. I was not sure about the quality of my show. So yeah, I was sharing it with people, and then I got really nice feedback in the beginning from the guests themselves. They said, wow, we really like it. And then from then I'm using social media for my business and for my clients. So I'm putting it out there on every social media channel. I make like these snippets, these clips of video that I put out there. I also mentioning it on my mailing list, but those things, I must also admit that I can be even more consistent with it if I want to grow more. Like I'm consistent with the podcast recordings. I am now trying to find the best way to get my show notes in time, to get my reels, my snippets out there at time, to get everything in a structure. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, we understand that challenge for everyone, right? Yeah, it's so great though that you at least have that consistency of your show down, because that's the hardest thing. If I can't get my clients to record, I can't make them do it, right? I can produce everything else for them on the back end, but if I can't make them record, it's not going to happen. So the fact that you're doing that is way ahead of everybody else and is going to continue to compound with listeners for you. So I recommend that. And I think that that's so good that you're concentrating on trying to make the social media consistent, the production side consistent. That's going to reward you with listeners in the end. So.
Exactly. And it's also something, when I've started the podcast, I don't know, in the beginning, you need to build your audience, of course, your podcast audience, but I had already an audience on social media. So I can say to people, it will be shared on social media. You will get, visibility in that way. So that also helped.
Good. Well, hey, imposter syndrome lesson to everyone out there. Listen to Joeri, because what he's just said there was that he wasn't sharing his own show, but his guests were more than willing to. That should say something really strong about you, right? So take a cue from your guests. If they're willing to share it, you should be sharing it. You are not an imposter. I love that. Well, now monetization. Let's talk about that, because you were mentioning, you've gotten some offers to cut the line and have some guests in with earlier episodes so that it fit their publicity timing, which is great that you can make a little money there and help offset some of your costs. It's not gonna, it's not going to make your business, but how has your business, are you seeing the biggest return on investment for the time spent podcasting? Are you seeing it with your book sales? Are you seeing it with business opportunities coming your way, speaking events? Where are you seeing the return?
Well, I see that I'm reaching another audience, more international audience that I didn't reach, before. I see that because when I post my podcast on LinkedIn or on other socials, I get new followers, or I get different contacts, and I get more like on calls because people want to talk with me. So that's one thing. Another thing is also that I'm using a book for that also. I have some affiliates, I would say, or collaborations with businesses that I can also use for my podcast. Haven't done it yet, but that's something that I was thinking of using that. And next to that, the fact that you build the authority by doing those podcasts, and that you can talk to those people, and that you can build relationships, like I said in the beginning, with people that you won't expect perhaps at first, that also opens doors. So that's what I'm seeing at the moment. And also, Tracy, because being on those podcasts and really listening, but that's also something that I got the feedback from my guests, that I'm really listening to them. I also learn stuff that I directly can put in practice. That is also beneficial for my business.
Well, so being a fractional CMO, and that's your role that you predominantly play, although you do help, I'm going to call it solopreneur startups. And that's why the fractionalness is important, because they're not ready for a full-time CMO yet. Do you find that there's a big difference in the things that you hear, the stories on your show, the things that you would do for corporation versus the things that you would do for solopreneurs and startups? Like, is there a big difference in the approaches to marketing?
Well, I would say that the people I'm talking to on my podcast and the feedback that I get are more specialized in a certain area, like, for instance, in storytelling, like in Google, like on some other domain, and they really are excelling there, but not everywhere. Whereas a solopreneur, he's someone that does everything in his business.
So that's so interesting. So what I'm getting from what you just said there is that the people you're interviewing have more specialties, and corporations have the ability to hire a bunch of different specialists and bring them together and to accomplish the marketing. But those of us with small companies, we're really looking at it from a generalist perspective. We need someone who's good at everything.
Yeah, and they want to learn also to do it. Either they want like someone to coach them, to help them, or they want to follow a training with me, or they like someone just to tell them how to do it so they can try to do it themselves. For instance, how to, run a promotion on LinkedIn or on Facebook, how to make a newsletter, what should I do, to get found on Google. But it's okay. Those are more like the basic steps, and those solopreneurs just want to know how it works. And to be honest, Tracy, often they say, "Oh, we don't have the time. We want you to help us." But that's their first goal.
I've been so when we first started our podcasting business, that was the thing, is like people would say, "Well, what are you doing that is so successful with podcasting, and can you teach me how to do it?" So then I'd go, "Okay, well, here's what I'm doing," and I'd list off all these things, and they go, "Can I just give you my credit card? Can you just do it for me?" Because that's way too much to learn. I don't want to do that. And that's the way marketing feels today, doesn't it? There's too many moving parts and too many strategies, philosophies, and tactics that go along with it.
Yeah, and I had already 2 or 3 guests on my show that talked about Google, but every time the story is different. So it's not always that you think it's the same things that they will tell you. It's always a different angle or a different story, and you always learn something for them. But
like interesting. I said, their experience with how Google, promoted their business or didn't, or.
Yeah, and sometimes it also has to do with the place that I live in. So, for instance, okay, I'm in Europe. In the US, it's not such a problem. The GDPR, the privacy law, it's different in here than it is in the US, or the way that you use mailings, or the way that people use, for instance, Amazon to find something. It's different in Belgium or in the UK or in, for instance, Portugal or whatever. It's different everywhere, and that's so exciting to learn this.
We were just talking about that differences the other day, because because of the GDPR, we have those rules have affected how we download Kindle books here. So we used to be able to go into the Kindle app, which makes sense, right? Like if I've downloaded the Kindle app, it's in my username. I'm a subscriber. Like I obviously have an account. I have a Kindle, and so, but I can't buy a book through the Kindle app anymore. Yeah, because of the new rules about it, and the fact that it really, at the end of the day, this is the frustrating part from a user, is that it's all about greed on Google and Apple's end. Like that's what it is, and it's frustrating.
It's first, and also, one of my last podcast guests, he gave me a code to download this book on Amazon. But it's a code for the US. In Belgium, I cannot use it.
You can't even use it. Oh, that's terrible. Well, you know what we may need to do? I'll do it and I'll gift it to you. Like maybe we have to do that. That might work. Yeah, we'll have to do that. So, oh my gosh, you realize that this now, I think that's really going to be the eye-opening thing as you continue to do your show, is really exposing these differences internationally between our countries and the way things work. I mean, we could learn something really different about where we might be in 2 years and what we should do about it and where those problems are. And we could solve them ahead of time if we're really paying attention. Yet another reason to listen to your show, Joeri.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it. I love it. Well, let's talk about your book, because I definitely want to talk about that. So the 5K challenge for solopreneurs. First off, I mean, at first when I saw it, I was like, wow, solopreneurs, 5K. Like it seems small to me, but I was thinking about it. It's the right metric for moving past that first stage, right? 5K is the right amount for that. It's small long-term. You're not going to build a sustainable business off of that. But if you don't get past that, you can't scale to that next level.
Right. And it's funny because you are people that, I would say that the most positive feedback I always get outside of Belgium. When it's in Belgium, you never, your own country, the place where you live, you're never the hero. And they look at my book and say, yeah, I don't believe that. How can you make 5K, on social media in 21 days? So for some people, it's like, oh, that's a small amount. For others, it's
Right. Well, yeah, because here in the US, we're inundated with courses and programs that say you'll make $1 million in, $1 million launch and, junk like that. And they're not believable either. That's why I think realistically, I think that 5,000 is a really good number that's going to give you something that you could then turn into sustainable growth. Right. And then the next month you can do 10. And then, and I really think that that's possible.
It is possible. It depends also on your business, of course. Are you, what kind of product or service are you selling? But I did it when COVID hit, when I lost lots of my clients. I, started to doing stuff which worked at that moment. And I got a lot of new clients. And then finally, I was already writing the book, but it made me think of how can I, put this information, these things that I learned into my book, because it's really helpful for people. And then, Tracy, how did I do that? In the beginning, it was, a book about Facebook marketing and so on. And it was in Dutch, then it was into English. And then I was really struggling to make progress. And then my coach said, it was almost Black Friday. Why don't you make it a challenge, Joeri? And she challenged me, how to make 5K. She said 10K. I said 5K sounds more like logical, or it sounds good, I thought, in 21 days without using ads. And I made, I started to...
And that's it. So that's the key that you just said here, without using ads, which I think are really critical, because if you had written this in 2021, come 2022, the ads stopped working. We were running ads in 2021 that just absolutely stopped working altogether in 2022 through nothing different than we were doing, all through the algorithms, all through the changes in Facebook, or the changes in all of the different places, in email, all the changes there too, because your follow-up wasn't coming through. So so I love that that's what your challenge is, which is why I think the 5,000 is really realistic and really doable for people.
Yeah, they should try, of course. And that's always with the book, because what will most people do? They will start executing because it's a plan, it's guidelines in the book. They will start doing it and they will stop. Most people will quit before they arrive at, if they just start a business or they want to grow their business online. And this is critical that you continue doing it, of course.
That's why a challenge is so good. Such a good idea. Your coach was really smart there.
Yeah. And I said to people, okay, even if you don't do it 21 days, one day after the other, take some more time, but just follow all the steps and do it consistently. And then you will get the results.
Yeah. Well, this is what I find in marketing, and maybe, I think that the thing that you mentioned at the very beginning about being consistent in marketing, is the key at the end of the day. That there's so much of this, just try it. But when you just try something, it's actually not giving it enough time, or you didn't give it the prep necessary, right. Or we plan to launch a course, launch a book, launch a program, whatever that is. And we really didn't do the months of work needed to really prep that up ahead of time to make it as successful as possible. That consistency is really missing in marketing because there's so much of these flashy opportunities.
Yeah, people get distracted and they see some new thing and something else. And you have to choose, of course, something and go for it. That's why I didn't launch my podcast at the time that I was writing my book. I wanted to do first one thing, finish it, and then do the next thing, because I'm someone that likes, to do different things, but you need to make a choice and then being consistent. Because if I hadn't been consistent, I could have given up the podcast 1 month ago and then okay, it doesn't work for me. But now you see, I'm continuing, and it's the last weeks, it was not something that I expected already, at this moment. I was just starting it okay, I need to do this. It feels like I need to do this. And I was not directly expecting anything back, but I was sure that it would come because it felt good. So
it felt good and it was working right. So marketing advice. what's some advice that you can give to someone who's just launching their podcast? What from a marketing perspective can they do to help get some successful exposure and listens onto their show, right? They want to get listeners right away. What are some successful marketing things they can do there?
Right. So first, of course, you need to have the podcast. You have, like I said, the right.
It needs to be ready to go, right?
Yeah. So that's the same thing with the book. Marketing. It needs to be ready to go. And you need to have at least, like I said, 5, 6, 7 episodes that I know that I can launch and that I can, that the train is already, that it's going on. That
so you know what you're going to be marketing, right? So you have a sense of that.
You need to know what you're going to be marketing. You need to know your audience. So you really need to think of what are the people or what the audience of maybe it's your customers, maybe it's a new niche. What are people that you want to reach and that you feel like you can really connect with? Once you get that, you find the title that goes with that people, like you said in the beginning, that recognize them in the podcast. And then, of course, if you have already a social media channel or a social media presence, then you need to think of how can I make sure that when the podcast is released, that I have a system in place to show it to other people. A good thing is also if you have this mailing list. If you don't have it, it's good to build one or to start to do something. And I would say notify people that you have this podcast. So like people on your LinkedIn or good connections of yours, or just that
don't forget to tell people, right?
Tell people. And like I said in the beginning, I shared my podcast, but I was not really, telling to everyone. But perhaps, that depends how you feel about it. But I think the best thing is just to talk to people and get feedback. And then, feedback is always good. Either things that you can improve, or on the other side, that your things that are doing are really good, so you can you continue them. And then what also good is to talk to others that have a podcast. Can be a coach, but can also be other people and listening to other people, or like I'm doing now, being a guest on other people's podcasts to see how they are doing it and learn from that.
What's next for you, Joeri? What's next for CMO Stories? What are you gonna up level to in the next year?
Yeah, for me, the next step is to already had some interesting people on my podcast, like the inventor of Siri, like Mark Howell, who has written a bestseller book. Already have also Matt Schaefer that showed interest in my book. So I like to have you on my podcast, Tracy. I like to have people on my podcast that have I would say a bigger audience than I have, or another audience that also is the audience for my podcast. So, and in that way, I can get more visibility, more reach by having, I would say people on my podcast that have that are more.
It sounds like you're dialing it in tighter.
Yeah, that's something I will do. So in the beginning, I would say it's like in the beginning I was tight with the CMOs, then it grew bigger, and now I'm going again tighter because I have now the scarcity aspect also of my podcast. I don't, if people contact me, even if they want to pay, it should fit with the podcast, and it should. I now have something that people like. I want to keep my audience. I want to be.
That exclusivity factor is what you've got going for you. I love that. Yeah.
So that's next. And also I will think of the monetization aspect of it. Also, how can I improve my podcasts on that level and on other levels? So I will always be open to feedback, and maybe also to work together with other shows. So I don't know. I'm thinking about that. What also happening is now. You asked me on your podcast. I had today also a guest that also asked me to come on his podcast. So people asking me back, and that will also
the swap. We call it the podcast swap. Yeah. Well, because my listeners are listeners, right? So it's actually easier to have another podcaster as a guest, right? You have more likelihood of getting listeners from me being on your show and from you being on my show. It's going to happen.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's you need to go where the audience is, and if they resonate with the subject or with what you're talking about, you can have those followers. That's the same with social media. Yeah, you need to go there where if you invite someone that's not on social media, it will not bring you followers on that social media channel. But if you know that it's someone that has a lot of followers, then it will work. Same with podcasting and so on.
Well, one of the things that podcasters always say to me when they first start their show and they start looking at their stats, which, I consider vanity metrics. I don't really want them obsessing over them, but it's nice to look at them after a month of, of shows and seeing how you're doing, is they're always astounded by the number of countries they're in and the different people who are listening. But I see it from this fact of it's still the big chunk for us US podcasters is the US. And then there's lots of other countries that sort of fall around that. Do you find that you're having a bigger listening base within your country, or is it really more with that? It's more broad?
It's it's international. It's I think I'm a bit everywhere, but not I'm not really, I don't think that I'm on the top charts, but I'm really, spread around the world. And the reason is that I have people from everywhere that share it with their listeners. So I see in these stats that it's a nice, when I look at the map, it's nice to have like these colors everywhere on the world. So,
well, we'll have to check you out. We'll put you in Podetize and you have to check out, because we now have in Podetize the stat where we look at similar shows. So it shows you who you're compared against. So we now have the ability to give you that view on our stat side. And I can tell you, it fascinated me, some of the shows that I was compared against, because I was like, I've never heard of that. Oh, it's an Australian show, or I was really surprised at the internationalness of what it pulled up in my niche that I had not realized, because when I pull it up in the search engine on my end, if I'm just looking for it, it really pulls up my country first. And I don't think anyone realizes that our listening apps treat us like the listener we are, and they assume locality for you, which isn't necessarily the right thing. But the statistics show something completely different on the other side. And I thought that was really interesting. So, well, good for you that you're all over the world. You've got this international flavor to your show. CMO Stories, I predict really good things for you, for your business, and for the show itself. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Joeri. I'm so glad we met on Podmatch, and I'm so glad we've done this wonderful show exchange.
It was a pleasure, Tracy. And of course, I'm also looking at your Podetize offering. And indeed, it really has lots of good stuff for me. These analytics, and also the fact that you have coaching, because that's also important for people to be consistent. If not only because you have guests, but if you have a following, or you have someone that is people that you can discuss with, the chances are that you stay consistent. So
absolutely. I told you that was going to be interesting and get that international flair. And I got to ask the question that I've always really wanted to know is we're all fascinated here with our international statistics. And he seems to be just as fascinated with his US statistics. So I love that. I think that that's really great. It is so impressive to me when someone can start a show and they're in the marketing world. So it seems to me that, this is just another tactic, some other thing I could start it. They could choose anything to do, and they decide to start a podcast. And then they start to find traction, success, and then they start to think of new ways. How am I going to market my show? How am I going to use it? How am I going to drive leads from this? And they really start to get into that. And that's what I find fascinating about this interview with Joeri. And I find fascinating about his show is the kind of questions that he's asking, because I can hear him asking the CMOs on his show about things that he's thinking about marketing his podcast, about marketing for his clients. I can hear that in the way that he is asking questions. And that's why CMO Stories is a show that you're not going to want to miss. You're going to want to check it out, hear what Joeri Billast has to say, and really enjoy the exposure to all these different podcasters and the way that they are marketing their show, growing their show, and finding success. So that's why we're here on The Binge Factor. I hope you'll join me next time with another podcast host from The Binge Factor. And don't forget, you can apply if you've got a show at thebingefactor.com. And you can also check out Joeri's show, check out CMO Stories, and find out everything about how to link to him, how to find his social channels, how to do all of that by going to thebingefactor.com and going to the blog post for this episode. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next time on The Binge Factor.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.